Thank you for joining us. I'm Terry Lohman, co-chair for UU's for a Just Economic Community. In today's workshop, we're bringing together those in the labor movement and Unitarian Universalism to discuss ways that we can and do work for justice together. We'll hear from Cleola Brown, president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, a longstanding constituency group of the AFL-CIO, and the A. Philip Randolph Institute promotes the full participation of everyone in the union movement and works towards social, political, and economic justice for all workers. We'll also hear from Carlos Jimenez, Special Projects Manager for the AFL-CIO, and Denise Moorhead, co-founder of UU Class Conversations. Co-chairing the Unitarian Universalists for a Just Economic Community, I have a deep appreciation because the really horrible thing we're going through right now is escalating inequality, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Well, there's only one way to balance billionaires, and that's with unions. Cleola, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cleola Brown, president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and I'm the director of Civil and Human and Women's Rights for the AFL-CIO. For those of you who may not know what that looks like, it's a federation of about 60 unions. It represents about 12.5 million working people in every type of job across this economy. First, I want to say how honored I am to be joining you for your General Assembly. That's a big deal, and I know that. So I'm grinning a lot, and I'll probably grin a little bit more as we go along because I'm going to be learning from you as well as having this great opportunity to share with you. Now, I wish I could be there with you in person, but unfortunately I can't. But the labor movement is there 100% by way of knowing the importance of joining you in every struggle and any kind of coordination for the rights of people, for freedoms, for jobs, for equality. All of that is what I'm hoping to convey to you today for my reason for being here. I want to say hello to Terry Lohman, first of all, to say it's good to see you and it's good to be a part of this piece this afternoon. I want to thank the cohort who tries to make me look smart and intelligent, Michael Spock, but he knows I'm from the country, so you're going to get just what I am. Now, I can say to you that the labor movement and communities of leaders of faith have historical bonds. It's always been us walking side by side, no matter what the faith has been, but understanding that community involves all of who we are. And that bond is instrumental to the advancement of social and racial justice. And you can tell by looking at your screen, I am a Black woman all day, every day. But I'm also a trade unionist through and through. Now, Dr. King made it real clear when he saw the connection between racism and economic oppression. Dr. King knew too well that you could not have one without the other. You could not have racial justice without economic justice. That's why he worked so hard to bring the civil rights movement and the labor movement together. Because it was clear to him that what's the good of having the right to buy a hamburger when you didn't have the money to make that happen in the first place. Now, Dr. King knew a good union job was often the first step in generating wealth and creating economic power. Everyone knows all of the good sayings that he said. I'm not going to waste your time by saying every single thing to sound or act smart. I just want to have a conversation and know that I'm a worker. I come out of a plant. So you will not get great big old words that I will say that will make me look or sound profound. I'm still a worker, working for justice and being fortunate enough to be a part of the AFL-CIO. Now, 60 years ago this summer, 250,000 people came into Washington to march for jobs and freedom. That was where those marchers heard Dr. King speak of his dream for America, where they heard him refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice was, and I hate to still say this now, but still is, bankrupt on a lot of occasions. Justice is something that folks have to make happen. And you don't make things happen unless you're able to raise your voice and be able to talk about those causes that are firsthand to you. Now, those marches joined together for civil rights and workers' rights, freedom and jobs, that sometimes get kind of lost in the history of the 1963 March on Washington. But Dr. King, a lot of folks thought that that was his march, but he was a young, old, charismatic speaker that was invited by the actual organizers of the march. And I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the president of that organization now. Asa Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin actually put that march together. Bayard Rustin, the complete genius, was the strategist and chief organizer, as a matter of fact. Now, as Randolph continued to do his work, he had heard Dr. King speak along the way with such passion that it was absolutely necessary to be able to relate to all of the people. And a big portion of that was to the faith community. Now, I'm not sure that many of you know that Bayard Rustin was an openly gay man, did not hide it, talked about who he was if asked, lived through the treatment of being abused because of who he was, and also reminded folks on many occasions that was not the only thing that he was. He was an activist, he was a fighter, he was a strategist, but he was also a man who believed in faith, had strong faith and strong beliefs. And even when he was brought to a point where he was treated without respect, he knew that the cause was bigger than him, and he took the abuse when they shoved him into the trunk of a car to make sure that he could at least make the march happen and other kinds of activities happen. He took that because that's what was necessary to make things happen. Now, Randolph, on the other hand, was 6'3", big baritone voice, talked with such magnetism that he could stop a room in a whole heart minute. But he too comes from a faith background. His father was a minister. His mom was a hairdresser. But his father taught him the necessity of knowing the whole person and involving the entire community, because no one person or no one organization knows everything. But when you got faith walking along side by side with the cause that's brought you there to be a part of what is a movement, understanding that both are equal partners and understanding that it's necessary to be respectful of the total human being, you had something that you could work with. Now, although it was 60 years ago, I happened to be at that march as well. Certainly not a big player. I left the house without permission, left from Philadelphia to go into Washington, D.C. on a Greyhound bus for $2.41. Got to the march without any passes, papers, or anything else, but we had heard over the radio that this march was going to take place and what they were going to do. And thank God there were folks on the various buses, one of which I was on with one of my best friends, who had church people on the buses, organized in a fantastic way. Black women will pack a lunch in a heartbeat. And there were sandwiches enough and cold food to go with it, cold chicken, which was smelling up the whole bus, was smelling so good it drove you crazy. Pound cake that made a smile come to your face, even if you knew you were going to get a whipping when you got back home for running without permission to go to this march. When we got there, we did not understand or know what to do. And on that day, personally, I became a tree person, because those of us who were young and came to the march without credentials, we climbed up in the trees so that we could see the stage. We listened to the voices and the speakers because that was a good vantage point. And on that very day, we saw and remembered who helped us when we were talking about what the next steps were. So that was something I hid for a lot of years, that I was a tree person, but I've learned to wear it with badges of honor and pride. And I remember too, those fine sisters from the various churches that fed us up and fed us back, heading to and from Philadelphia, to make sure that we were comfortable, that we were cared for, and that we behaved. And to also understand that this was God's work that was going to be done that day. At least the message was going to be delivered that way. And we heard from a minister that absolutely captured the necessity for faith to be a part of any movement that was going to be relevant. Now, the alliance between labor and faith-based organizations, regardless of what the title of the organizations are, was one that Asa Philip Randolph made sure was one that was going to be driven, regardless of the color of the skin, who you love, the society, with or without, any kind of strict organizational limitations, but it was about people. And many of the people that took leadership roles had that double deuce. They were workers, but they were also good-faring, God-faring people. And they were people that understood the necessity of partnership. The alliance between labor and civil rights was forged through shared values, that all people deserve political and social freedom and economic justice. That alliance helped the civil rights movement achieve one of its greatest victories, the passage of the 1964 Voting Rights Act, which removed the last remaining legal barrier to broad Black political participation. Now, some folks say that really did a big deal, but it wasn't but for the feet that hit the bricks, the marchers that made the decision to march, the voices that got lifted from every element of our society, that made these passages of all of the civil rights pieces actually come to fruition. The alliance was the reason why Dr. King was in Memphis in 1968. He was there in support of 1,300 sanitation workers, all Black workforce, on strike to gain recognition for their union and a contract for a living wage. There's a difference between getting paid for a job and a living wage. You can go to work every day, and if it does not put food on the table every day, you're showing up, but still not at a level where you can do something that really does make a living difference for you, the family that you actually are doing this job for. Now, these garbage men were on strike, carrying signs that read, "I am a man, to be treated with dignity and respect." And in taking a look at the historical footage, there was a look of determination is what I'm trying to put out there, that cannot be mimicked by somebody practicing to do it. It came from the heart and through the passion. Walking alongside those sanitation workers were deacons from various churches, clergy members walking in front of these workers to really make sure that they were safe. People on the sidelines, taking a look and taking a listen and chanting with them, and even standing for them in many situations there in Memphis, to make sure that the messages that Dr. King was delivering and that other leaders, both clergy and lay, were delivering was heard in a proper way. Now, he knew that human dignity is not an abstract idea, it's an experienced and very real way that these kinds of thinkings can actually be received in the way that they ought to be, that they must be protected. And you can't be talking at people, you must talk with people in order for any message to be a collective, active, motivational piece. Collective bargaining does that. It turns a bad job into a good one because you get substance from a good job. Labor and civil rights movement were united in the belief that our country could fulfill its promise, that everyone in every race, every religion, every creed was entitled to liberty, equality, and justice. That remains true today. And these are values that the labor movement and the Unitarian Universalists share. That's why we want to have this kind of a discussion. Where we're going, how we're going to do it, and why it's important that we remain in strong coalitions to make things happen. The preamble of the AFL-CIO Constitution vows to vanquish oppression in all of its forms. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. A union contract is all about the dignity of work and about the dignity of workers. A union contract is also about the dignity of self-worth and recognizing that there is value in oneself. And the union contract has brought countless working people better wages and benefits, but it does so much more, especially for people of color and those who are from the LGBTQ community who are working people also. That double-edged sword that Rustin faced at the very beginning exists today. And there is no need to try to sugarcoat any of it. The reality is it's there, it's alive, and sometimes it's a fatal existence that deserves to be lifted up so that everyone that's within the workforce gets a clear understanding that this is a family of all kinds, of all of us, and to remain loyal to the principle that everyone deserves that kind of a right. Now, we continue to say that a union contract is the best way to do that, but a good, solid relationship that reflects all of who we are is an even better one. It makes all of those things that are written in verbiage even stronger because it's written on principle and unity. Now, today, union workers earn about 18% more than their non-union counterparts. African Americans, the union wage difference is about 20%. For women, it's about 23%. And for Latinos in a union, their wages are 35% higher. The union difference is more than higher wages. Union members are more likely to have access to employer-sponsored health plans and the care and retirement benefits that makes us a whole and entitled human being as we do this work that is so important, but it's beneficial to us through those arms and legs and limbs, voice and character and respect that is there for all of us. That's why it's so important for workers to be able to come together in a union freely without intimidation and obstruction. And people want to form unions. I am so happy that today I can say the AFL-CIO is alive and well and kicking and growing. I'm even happier to say that the president of the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler, is the first female that leads the organization and does that from a place of pride and does that from a seat of strength and power and dignity that includes all of us. Women understand the difference, just like men do, just like the LGBTQ community does, but all of that makes a huge difference when you come from that space and are able to implement it into what you're fighting for. Employers, according to recent reports, are charged with violated federal labor laws in 41.5% of union elections and campaigns. That's not something that gets made up. You would think that at 2023, we would not have those issues. But what folks count on is that we will no longer have the kinds of conversations that bring us unity, that brings us strength, that brings us the kinds of voices that is reflected throughout our society. That's why labor, civil rights, and religious rights are all a part of the connection that made for a strong country, that made for a strong existence for working people. And that's exactly why here at the AFL-CIO, we are always looking, under the leadership of President Schuler and Secretary Treasurer Fred Redmond, to be able to continue the commitment that was made so very clear all of those years ago, that inclusive and respect and dignity and pride is necessary to be inclusive of all of who working people are. And a large part of it has to do with their faith. And the AFL-CIO and the Unitarian Universalists have so many shared values. We both want justice and fairness for all people, especially for people of color and the LGBTQ community. And we believe that we can provide a unique moral witness that politicians and community groups cannot, because that's where we started, that's where we are dedicated to continuing, that's where we are developing our strength. Unitarian Universalists could attend union organizing campaign meetings, offer a prayer or a speech from their religious tradition about the rights of workers to organize, assist organizers with a union election by accompanying them on workplace and house visits, advocate for employer neutrality by requesting to meet with company management, participate with faith leaders in a press conference. There are a number of ways that the dignity and respect that coming from the Unitarian community, they would give that kind of power and strength to working people that the labor movement could not provide alone. It never has. I don't think it ever will, because without faith, there is very little opportunity to encourage and strengthen a movement, as good as it may be, from becoming better. We are natural partners. We can do many wonderful things, but the operative word is we. Understanding that alone we get nothing done, understanding that together we can do just about anything. If we can collectively be able to give our message, and if sermons can be delivered in support of working organizing unions, we will be able to get to the dream that was there, so that the reality will continue to show its face through the strength and the organizing that happens across the world. We have more than 400 local labor bodies all across the country in every state, including DC, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And this relationship will certainly open the door to develop ongoing relationships and the possibility of working together on programs such as labor in the pulpit. That's what we're looking to have good dialogue about today. How is it that we do the dialogue, but more than that, how is it that we form the strength that's necessary to do what is best, and doing our best to make sure that workers' rights, human rights, civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, every color in the rainbow rights that's out there, that it's done from a level playing field. Now, I know I talked a whole bunch right there in that little package, but the whole point was to hear where you are, to show a little of who we are through dialogue and conversation. I'm here. I'm not running to go anywhere. I'm so excited to have this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the interaction between everyone that's a part of this call. So Terry, I say thank you, and Michael Schbach, I say thank you as well for making this dialogue possible. Thanks a bunch, whoever is on the Zoom. Appreciate you and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you for sharing, Cleola. I don't see how she's old enough to have experienced all these things going in 1963, but she did. But I have a deep appreciation for it. I recall my father, who was never known for being a good driver, deciding to take the road less traveled, which was not a road at all, in his new 1965 Ford. And he made a trip and came back and noticed that the gas gauge was on empty. So he pulled into a gas station, and this was back when we had attendants. The attendant put in the pump and started it up, and the gasoline ran out right onto the paving. And the guy looked around. He said, "Is this candid camera?" Because couldn't figure out how we were missing a gas tank. Well, it was during a strike at Ford Motors, and it was 2 weeks to get a new one. And I said to my dad, "Doesn't that piss you off?" And he said, "No, I really respect unions, and they've done a lot for our country, and it's well worth the 2 week wait to get our new tank." And so we did wait, and I learned a lesson from that. I have a cousin who worked in accounting in Chicago, and he wasn't a union man, but he said, "Oh, I really appreciate unions because every time they got a raise, I got one too." And the treatment of employees was just a whole different thing because the unions were there and they knew we could unionize. So he felt a lot of gratitude for unions. And Carlos Jimenez from the AFL-CIO will tell about his experiences in the unions and why unions are so important to Unitarian Universalists. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you, Terry. And I guess I'm thinking I should do a little bit of an introduction here just to introduce myself and to make sure I let folks know who you are. But just like Cleola, I would like to express my appreciation for the opportunity and the invitation to be here. I would have done it just if Terry had asked, but then to know that, it was actually, a part of the broader UU and just an incredible network that we've worked with. I was excited to be here. And I want to come back to some of what Cleola said, Terry, some of what you opened, but just by way of introduction, I do special projects here at the AFL-CIO. I get the privilege and the honor of really every day thinking about this question of growth and what it's going to take to grow the labor movement. I get to work with unions, I guess internationals, but also state federations and local federations, and really think around how we're coming together and thinking about the new economy and thinking about the current workforce, and ensuring that that unions continue to build and set standards and improve working conditions for folks into the next century. I was really appreciating Cleola's story, and I got to say, I love sitting and learning from folks like Cleola, Terry. I too can't believe she was around for all of that, but that picture, I mean, one, I want to know more about that story of the trees. I was like, what's going on? What was that march just sounded a lot more vibrant and organic, and a lot was going on there, and that felt really powerful, actually. Just thinking about folks getting on buses, not really knowing they heard it on the radio and coming down to Washington, and a palpable feeling of people asserting like that they have a role, and that they want more, was just really powerful to be reminded of. But Terry, your opening just I think for me was like two great examples of just some things that I think are important, right? The story of the batteries, or just the Florida shutdown, and the recognition that, like, in this economy, like, one, the interconnectedness and some of the values, but even thinking about it as consumers and some of our power and the choices we make, and how those are important, actually was really refreshing. And then the recognition, was it by your uncle, that look, workers, whether we're in the same firm or employer or not, often we're on a similar boat, and the tide is going up or it's going down. So we really have to recognize that there's a little bit of a class there, and I know Denise is going to talk more about that. But I really appreciated Cleola's piece about the picture of then and now, right? And thinking about the '60s, which is I wasn't around in those moments, but you think about the civil rights movement, the movement for economic justice, and actually a moment where folks were coming to work together in really powerful ways. And it's hard not to think about now and the importance of still doing that, right? And so I say that because, I guess I debate whether I'm older or younger, or what am I? I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, but it does feel like, I'm witnessing, having been in unions and the labor movement for about 20 years now, a revival or a rebirth, is the word that's sometimes used. I sometimes think about it, or I think about as the arrival of a new generation, in a moment, a generation of workers in a moment where really big questions and major decisions about the future of the economy, the future of work, are not just being talked about, but are actually being acted on in front of our eyes. All of these pieces of legislation about federal investments. I mean, we're talking about bringing new sectors online into our economy, and that doesn't happen every single day, right? This kind of this new workforce, which I would say isn't solely driven or related to age, though it's impossible to dismiss or not notice the importance of Gen Z and millennials and their arrival into the workforce, but it's also women in the workforce. It's folks are talking about race in the workforce, how class and educational opportunity are important across the entire workforce, right? Particularly because of, and in the wake of the pandemic, a whole lot of workers and people are wanting to voice an opinion, and I think had thoughts and feelings around how the economy was going over the last 30, 40 years. And really this question of who and what has value in the economy. And I think what we're seeing right now is workers trying to assert that they, not only do they have a role in the economy, or we have a role in the economy, we actually are a key stakeholder in it. And I think workers are trying to express and demand and figure out, one of the things that they've been doing since, I guess, since workers and employers and some of these arrangements have been in hand, which is like, how do they get their hands around the reins of power in the future and get a hand in shaping some of that? And so, as all of that is happening, right, unions are starting to look really good again. Now some of us have always thought like, oh wow, they're pretty special, right? Or they have great opportunity, but you know, and in spite of some of us would like to argue and say outdated and weak the current labor laws are. Workers are still trying to mobilize power and are looking for vehicles through which they could make real change. And so this is a moment where all of us, I think, need to really think about where we sit in the economy in relation to one another, where our communities are going, and really kind of showing up and thinking about that, right? Because I would argue, and I hope we can talk about it later, that actually the future and our democracy, all of this is really at stake here, right? And what we're talking about and doing here has implications for the economy and the world and the society that future generations will inherit. And so it's not just a trivial or a passing exercise, right? And so anyway, I'll stop there. In the interest of time, I know there's others to talk, but just really excited to be here and talk, connect, engage, and talk about this moment.
Yeah, our next speaker is Denise Moorhead. Her current UU connection, and she may have more than I know about, but she's one of the founders of UU Class Conversations, if I've got that right. And her union days go back to working at UU's service committee, and that was an organized office. And so she has actual UU experience as a union member, which is maybe a little bit rare. Uh, are you ready to go from there?
I'm Denise Moorhead. Hello, all. As Terry said, I'm working with UU. I'm a volunteer. We started an organization called UU Class Conversations. And as I was listening to Ms. Brown, I was reminded that unions are effective for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons is that they have a great ability to bring people together to act as a whole, to improve everyone's opportunities, everyone's life opportunities. And so there's a reason that both unity and union have the same Latin root of unio. And again, that means oneness, it means unity. And when we see we realize that, looking at the statistics, when unions work together, they're able to provide better benefits, which there's a relationship between better benefits, better salary, and one's class privilege. When you think about it, what is it? 85% of folks, folks not in a union only make 85% of the salaries that union members make. And there's more, certainly, again, to unions than the salary. Salary is huge and important, but there's also the opportunity to have better benefits. And again, when we think about class is a lot more than just your salary. Again, bottom line, salary is extremely important. Those of us who don't have huge salaries get that, but unions provide educational opportunities. They themselves offer things like educational opportunities. If you're traveling for work, better subsidies for that kind of thing and reimbursements. But they really push businesses and organizations to provide more, so that even though these other folks only make 85% and have 85% of the benefits than union members, the beauty of, again, kind of going back to that unio, the union members together work to improve their lot, but they make it better for everybody. Because we all know that when a union is able to improve the benefits, other businesses have to do the same. I mean, the reason that I actually worked for Amazon for a little while, and I remember that we weren't unionized, but they were able to get away with not paying us our Sunday, you get extra money on Sundays, whatever that's called. And we weren't getting that. We didn't get that at all. But when folks found that out, some of the unionized organizations, some of the unionized businesses, I was actually working for Whole Foods as part of Amazon. And there are in Massachusetts other supermarkets that are unionized. When they found out that we weren't getting that Sunday increment, they told us who to talk to. Next thing you know, we suddenly got a Sunday increment, and we got reimbursed for all those Sundays we had worked without that. So again, unions bring their own members together to have better salaries, better benefits, but they really help the rest of us if we're not unionized. So it's to everybody's advantage. Everybody's advantage. The more folks that are unionized, the better it is for everybody. The more class advantage that we have. And to be really clear about class, if we think about how do you define class, it's really looking at income and wealth, status, position, power, and then expectations and aspirations. We don't always think about that last piece, expectations and aspirations. That's another place where unions play a really important role. We know that through unions, having been in a union, I knew that I had a better opportunity to be promoted, to have extra opportunities that I would not have had if it had not been for the union that I was in. So my expectations, my aspirations were in a different place as the other members of my union. You know, we all benefited from the fact that the union gave us the opportunity and gave us the clout to expect more and to have higher aspirations about what we could do in those jobs, what we could do in terms of moving up in an organization, and kind of what we could do, you know, in the larger world. Because again, things like education, some of the other benefits would allow us to just kind of live better lives. Again, more class advantage. And part of another piece that unions play that's very important. People don't always think about it in terms of the unions and of your own class, but it's pretty critical to be able to have control. One of the things I should too is mention to you all is, you know, what the different classes are. Certainly when we look at class, there's persistent poverty and working poor. There's settled working class. There is kind of lower middle class, professional middle class, upper middle class, and then there are the folks we call the owning class. And one of the things that when we talk about class in the class, UU class conversations, in our conversations, our workshops, we emphasize the fact that the more class advantage you have, the more control you have over your life. You know, folks who are living in persistent poverty, the working poor, I mean, working poor people work so hard. You know, people will talk about those people, they don't do much. They're not getting much accomplished. I don't think we UUs do that very much, but sometimes some folks do. And, you know, part of our work is to educate the rest of the world that that's not the truth. But people who are living in persistent poverty, many folks are working 2-3 jobs, hardly ever home. You know, getting on buses and being on taking public transportation for hours at a time to get to a job that is barely paying, you know, a living wage, and oftentimes not paying a living wage. But as folks move out of persistent poverty, there are very few folks in unions living in persistent poverty. They are not the working poor. Okay? Unions help people move from that class to working class, to lower middle class, to middle class, and beyond. And as people are able to move, they have more control. They can live in safer neighborhoods. They can send their kids to better schools. Those are the kinds of things that unions allow us to do as we are able to improve our own class advantage.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking about why unions are good in the community. And I remember that union quality was always better than non-union quality. The labor was better trained and they were more professional about their work. I don't know how that would ever play out in UU service committee, because were there times where the union guided you to be able to do more justice work or more interesting justice work, or
There were times that the union and the management folks, usually, honestly, it was around contract more than anything.
Mhm.
And some of that did deal with, some of those issues were ones that allowed staff to provide better service, um,
Mhm.
to our members, to our supporters, to our partners around the US and in other countries. But honestly, for the most part, I can say, the management folks and the unions worked pretty well together. But the union was critical. And the reason there was a union to begin with was to kind of kick folks forward. I think
Mhm.
oftentimes that's the other beauty of a union. Sometimes things get kind of moribund. It's like, well, this is how we've been doing this. This is the way, this is why we do it this way. I think the beauty of the union at a place like the service committee was it really encouraged, and oftentimes demanded managers to try to look at new ways to do things, to expand our thinking. And that helped the entire organization. And again, the people that we served, the partners that we had. Um, so, yes, I mean, I think that the union and the management folks got along pretty decently, but the union would oftentimes push, push, push. Sometimes management would do the same thing, but I think that the reason there was a union was because the organization had gotten to a place where it wasn't making the same kind of innovative decisions, wasn't being as innovative as it had been for many years.
Mhm.
And in fact, the union played a really important role in the organization moving from a development organization, to being a human rights organization. That was key, and the
Mhm.
union was very important in that piece of us making. Management decided to start the move, but then it felt like it was getting stuck, and the union was really helpful in pushing for that. I can say in another organization, um, where I was a management person, but I saw, the unions. The union was really instrumental in helping the organization to think very differently about how decisions were made. There had been like an executive committee, of the senior directors, the executive director, um, and having done some work, um, with, outside folks who were doing class work. Um, but the union really was able to help us think about, um, how to have a different composition for the leadership committee. So the leadership
Mhm.
group was no longer the so-called leaders. The leadership group, they were the leaders for every group within the organization who came together and made really important decisions, for the organization moving forward.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that it gave employees a lot deeper satisfaction with their work. I mean, people who are going to work for the service committee are, they would have to be social justice soldiers
Very
or
much so.
whatever. And it would be really disheartening to get in there and find out the structure actually blocks your doing anything. My experience, I was in the restaurant business for 35 years,
Mm, mm,
and I can tell you our employees were the ones who moved us forward. They
mhm.
were the ones who had ideas. They came from other restaurants. They said, well, this is how we do it, did it there. And it really, it took a lot of minds to come up with a really good way to put things together. Uh, what do you
You know,
think on that, Carlos? Does
well,
it,
I've loved this conversation. I've been taking notes because I was like, well, this is all great. And I mean, I guess just to start, Janice, with some of your points, one, I'm just glad in a space where we could name things, right? And kind of aspect of things that make us who we are, right? Like class, and just that there are differences, right? And that there's questions of class mobility. But you made me think, and of hospitals. I used to be a healthcare hospital organizer, and I also worked in hotels. where this was true, but class is everywhere around us, and certainly the workplace is not a place where class is checked out, or race or gender or age is checked out, right? And that's not, whether you're younger or older, all of these things have real implications in the workplace, right? And so, but you think about a hospital, and you have people there with PhDs and super advanced degrees, and you have folks that may be working like as a subcontract employee in janitorial custody, and you have folks in cafeterias, you have folks with different licensing, and it's just it's a microcosm of society in some ways, right? These are like, there's all kinds of classes and all kinds of people, and actually that was always true in hospitality and hotels too, right? Like, who's working in banquets, why are women, and particularly women of color, often housekeepers and getting higher injury rates than other kind of crafts, right? Like, who's anyway, there's all of these things, and that's true in lots of ways, right? But I think one of the things that I really appreciated about unions, and some of the unions I've been a part of, is often, just it was the first opportunity that so many folks and workers to actually cross those lines and talk to somebody from a different class, talk to somebody that looked different than they did, that had a different experience, and they had a reason and a shared interest that was coming together, that was just new. And a kind of it's always been incredible to me see how new relationships, new friendships, people start talking, that didn't talk before. And I would argue that's really important in our society. We need to be creating bridges and helping people can make links. I mean, if we're talking about community, how do we build communities without those human links, and seeing that humanity in one another? And so I love that. I mean, as you were talking, the other thing I thought about, and I think you were talking about differentials, or that Sunday rate increase, right? Like,
Thank
if you
you.
work
Yes.
overnight, I used to work the graveyard before I was unionized, and let me tell you, I had thoughts on those differentials, because I was like, we work some crazy hours. We should make an extra dollar or two if you're working overnight. That is hard work, right? But actually, differentials are going away, right? People don't want to pay differentials, whether you're coming in on a holiday, on a Sunday, overnight. I mean, I think it's, just like, pensions and economic security. And I think about, like, my dad, my uncles, folks that are getting close to retirement age, and just, I worry about what a lack of pension, or, will Social Security be enough for folks to make it? And we know, right, that it's not enough, right? And so those are not insignificant things either, I would argue, right? And I think about that, right, because I often hear this thought that unions are a relic of the past, and I was like, well, some of those things were nice, and it'd be nice to have some of those things back, actually, and on the table, right? Because, and I really love your point, Denise, on, like, you do need to take care of some of those economic and kind of like real needs, if people are going to be able to further develop themselves, think about, like, doing new things, to engage in, like, things of the mind, the spirit, like all of those things, right? I think about, like, the hierarchy of needs, right? Like, to get into, like, social sciences, and, like, yeah, if people don't have food, can't go to the doctor, like, it's really hard to get somebody to volunteer to go knock on doors, right? And so so anyway, I was just thinking about that as you were saying that. And, like, I'll end here because there's more to say, but just on this relic of the past thing, I guess I've really been thinking about it and getting animated about it, because like, well, we're back at a point where, you hear about these manufacturing facilities in the South, or these temp agencies that are hiring kids, from Guatemala. You hear about Iowa rolling back child labor laws in the year 2023. And I guess the question I have, and the fear I have, is that I don't think it ends there. I think some of the folks that are advancing those things would go further and take more away off the backs of workers if allowed. And I think that's what this moment is. And I think why, we're trying to refigure out unions, because, it is kind of, it is a moment, I guess, right? But anyway, I'll stop there. I guess just you made me think of all of that, and then I said I would stop. But Denise, I wondered, as you were talking, it's like, well, part of having a union and a union contract is job security and transparency. I'm like, look, you can never replace the human elements. Different people have different management styles, but like you probably couldn't get arbitrarily fired, or you had mechanisms to like grieve and have recourse that most workers don't have as a default setting in our economy, right? I mean, most workers work at will. That means you can get fired for any reason, no reason, tomorrow, right? And you're out there. And you know, when you have a contract and you have that security, you do have a little bit more comfort speaking up, and you have processes, you know, that you're going through. So anyway, I guess I was thinking a lot as you were both talking, because I was like, yeah, that's, you know, those are really important things to talk about. But anyway, those are my reactions there.
Everything. In Iowa right now, we have a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, and about 5 or 6 years ago, they beat back the unions and said teachers can't strike, and they just did all sorts of things to undercut the unions. We have right to work laws, which is the weirdest thing. I think we liberals have allowed them to frame that in a way that just isn't true. It's a right to be abused at work is what it really is. We've
Right.
seen how they can abuse LGBT people. It's been really crummy lately, and it's just because we're not unified enough. I also wanted to mention, you talk about having the confidence of a contract and everything. And I've been doing community organizing for about the last 10 years, and I went through an Industrial Areas Foundation training, and I was really amazed to watch people who did not have my education or privilege, and they were really powerful, particularly Black women. They just got in there and held nothing back. They were really strong advocates for community improvement, and I don't know. It was just amazing to me. Um, the
Can I?
reason
Oh,
or,
sorry.
or our purpose today is to show how UUs and unions have a similar cause or almost the same cause. And last year I went through and made a list of things, and it's not even up to date, but reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights, immigration justice, racial justice, a just transition and climate change, democratic process and voting rights for all, gender justice, healthcare justice, um, stopping exploitation of prison labor, corporate responsibility, opposition to Citizens United, stopping torture, ending present day slavery, employment non-discrimination for sexual minorities, freedom of speech and airwaves, ending poverty, religious freedom, moral values for pluralistic society. These are all issues that the UUs have voted on in the last 23 years, and issues that they think are important. We've got the unions have our backs. We're only 140,000 people. Unions have a lot more, although I don't know the absolute numbers. Is it 10% of the workforce?
12 to 13 million in the AFL-CIO, a couple of million in kind of independent or non-affiliated unions. That's about right. In the public and private sector are different, but yeah, I mean, we're
Mhm.
now in the we're getting, yeah, we're continuing to decline, which is interesting, right? Because there were actually more union workers the last year, the 2022 than 2023, and a lot of
Hmm.
that growth was among people of color, largely, or low wage sectors. But I mean, this gets to the problem a little bit, right? Part of what's going on is our economy is growing, and there's so many new jobs that are being created. And that's one of the things I think I'd really want folks to be thinking about, because it's not just happening in isolation or in theory. It's happening in the South. It's happening in the Midwest, in the Southwest, in the Northwest. Everybody is trying to figure out, right, how to update their economy to kind of stay competitive going into the future. And I always like to tell people it's never easy, but it is easier to shape this on the front end than to try to bring it back and rebuild and fix all these holes once somebody's really kind of comfortable and set the standards and the kind of sector on their way, you know. And so this is a really important moment. But you know, what I would say is that, you know, and on all of those topics, I mean, I think there's alignment, but I think it's probably worth even going further, right? And I know, Terry, you do this, right? But it's like, how do we actually connect those dots intentionally? And because as you were listing off that list, I could actually see coworkers, colleagues, different trade unionists that are working on that. I was like, oh, we should make sure everybody is globally connecting. Because you know, folks that work on all of these issues would tell you we're up against powerful forces and people that don't want to see change. And we really do need to figure out how to build that you know, that alignment and that power and that shared vision and push and contest what's coming and where we're going, you know. And you know, I think, yeah, I'll stop here, right? Because I get a little squeamish when I use words like that, because like I sometimes I feel like unions also get a rap as just fighting, you know, and it's not about fighting, but it is about airing other perspectives and getting other voices in there and surfacing tension, which is just the thing that's out there sometimes, right? And then figuring it out. And I think that's, you know, that just it feels like it's getting harder and harder in society, as particularly power gets more concentrated. But it is really important, I would argue, in a healthy society to be able to say that and name it and then work the resolution. You know, so anyway, I'll stop there, but I really appreciated all you were saying on all of those things. And I think we would welcome ways to figure out how to continue working with folks, different committees, different structures in the UU coming out of this. I know, you know, just the partnership we've had with with so many of the committees we've worked in out in the field, Alaska, Arizona. I mean, it's just been so incredibly powerful. But the only thing I would say, and I want to say this carefully, is that it's not just unions, though. Certainly, you know, we want more unions. We think that's like important. It's workers, and it's even workers without unions often, right? And there's whole sectors of workers that legally can't have unions that actually are worth also thinking about, right? Think about care providers. Think about often farm workers. Think about, like, you know, just independent contractors and making sure that, like, they have their rights, right? Nobody's trying to take away their ability to, you know, be independent contractors, but we want to make sure that no employers are using those structures to undermine, you know, or underpay workers, right? And so it's just a very different economy. And so, you know, I say that because you'd be surprised, right? Sometimes you'll see, you know, it's baristas, bus drivers, librarians, art workers, nonprofit workers, sport workers, entertainment workers. You hear all kinds of folks unionizing, but I don't say, like, when people are pushing for living wages, when people are saying, like, we just need basic safety here, right? Like, we're not getting bathroom breaks. Those are really important things and things to connect to, and it's happening out there. And any, yeah, and I would just make that comment.
You know, Carlos, you were saying that you don't want to say that unions fight, and I think of unions as educating instead of, you know, they're not fighting, they're really educating. Unions play a really important role in educating their members, but also folks outside. You know, one of the reasons unions have always been a bit on the political side, and that's because they want politics that are going to benefit everybody in this country, and not just those who have, you know, who are the owning class. They want to make sure everybody gets a piece of that pie. I just want to say that when I think about education, unions have been on the forefront of thinking about class issues and have brought in people like me to do some training and workshops on class and talking about bridging class. We did a workshop one time, and it was really interesting that one of the young men who had just come on was doing like in the field, you know, he was out in the field doing door knocking. He had a lot of fabulous ideas and really good ideas, opinions to share. Sorry, I did that. My hands get a little too moving around, like, a little too much.
Okay.
Shut myself down. But I remember that some of the folks who had brought us in, who were the leadership, said to him, we had no idea that you were thinking this kind of stuff. This is really interesting. This is great. He said, well, I never really felt like I was in a position to say anything. I'm like, a little guy. I'm new and I'm young, and what do I know compared to you guys? And so I thought it was really wonderful the way unions are kind of stepping up and thinking about things like class and people having a say that may not be the so-called leaders and the top folks. And I think that's true on so many levels, that unions do a really good job. Even when folks go on strike, they explain why. They help the average person when teachers are striking and parents are like, my kid needs to go to school. And teachers are doing a really wonderful job in a case like that, of explaining, this is what's happening to your child under the current system. This is why we're striking. And I think the more unions do that, the better it is for them, the better it is for everyone to understand what those issues are. You think your kids, my kid's going to school every day. Well, they're not necessarily getting what they need. You've got my mother was a teacher, 42 kids in a class. My mother was a fabulous teacher. She was a master teacher, but nonetheless, 42 kids in the class. When they're third and fourth grade, they're not getting what they need. So when a teacher goes out on strike and says, I can't have 42 kids in a class, and parents are like, why not? And a teacher explaining that, and parents so, oh, wow, my kid's not getting what I thought they were getting. So I think that's a really important piece. That's an important role that unions play across the board of helping the average person to understand some of the things that they assume are great are not so great when you get to the bottom. You sort of hear what's really going on and you get to the bottom of the issue. It's a really
That's
important role
also
for
true.
unions.
That's also true for nurses.
Mm,
Nurses go on strike because they have 12 high need patients and they can really only handle 6.
mhm,
And who else is going to hold those hospitals responsible for
very
giving
true.
good care? I also heard you, Denise, talk about um, who to talk to when you weren't getting paid for uh, time and a half for working on Sundays, and that's the good education. Helping people make the connections to make sure their workplace is better is really important, and unions really are champions of that because that's what they've been doing. I want to talk about a couple of my heroes. One was Cesar Chavez, and he ate in our restaurant, and he had a macrobiotic diet, which I had never cooked for before. And he had some wine, which surprised me too. But turns out one of their issues with wine is pesticides, and they don't use pesticides on wine grapes. They only do that on table grapes, and they also treat them so that they last for 3 weeks, where the table or the wine grapes don't have to last that long. And Cleola had mentioned Bayard Rustin, and I made a poster of 50 people uh, of color and for UUs because we have so few people of color. I thought it'd be nice to have a poster of people that uh, we can look up to, and that it would be a sign in the gathering room that would say, we respect these people. And Bayard Rustin was just one of the people I came across. And the more I read about him, I was just blown away. He was a Quaker, and he was a pacifist. And in World War II, he went to prison rather than going to war, which not many people had the guts to do that. Um, he was a gay man, and I'm a gay man, so of course I appreciated that. And actually, after the union organizing, he died around 1986, but he was working on LGBT rights in the last part of his life. So I don't have any more questions. Do you have anything more you want to add to close this out?
Well, I mean, I would just say, and you know, the UU does this too, but you know, and you mentioned Chavez, and I've been thinking about President Chavez this whole time because I think, and I have to assume, like all organizers, we all heard it from someone else, but he would talk about like, you know, once you've taught somebody and they've learned something, you can't undo that learning. And I think that's so important and one of the functions that people do, because, and Denise, you were talking about this. I mean, in class, right? An agency and the power that people have to control and shape their lives. And I think that's a lot of what you learn in unions, right? And it's like, no, it takes X amount of votes to do something. And you need to talk to all of your coworkers and be on the same page and be willing to do things together. You know, and there's so many union members that like learn that, and then you know you see applying in like a local school board or in like local fundraising for like their church or community PTA. I mean, the skills are transferable, and you know, and you need more spaces, whether it's unions, the UU, like other spaces where we are just, you know, ensuring that that is happening. Obviously, not everybody, you know, that's not everybody's thing, but I do think the, you know, places where we help people understand their power and how to kind of try to shape the kind of community, the reality that, and their lives are really important. And so, you know, I just think because it's, you know, the thing I was just thinking, and I guess in conclusion is you know, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I guess that's, you know, I want to end in a positive kind of optimism note because you know, and again, not just young workers, but man, like I just see folks that are younger than me demanding and asserting for more than I ever dared demand, and I'm just like, ooh, this is good. Let's keep that going, you know. And so
Mhm.
I guess I would say that, but you know, because it did feel like forever, you know, and yeah, I'm like an older millennial. Maybe they call me an elder millennial. That's I don't know how I feel about that, but that's where I'm at. You know, it just felt like, you know, you saw the 90s, you saw the 2000s, and you saw people talking less about power, and you saw, you know, all of these things changing, and that is dangerous. I think, right? That we don't, if we don't know where we got things from, where we came from, it's really hard to figure out where you're going. And, you know, I mean, I just think it's worth knowing all of that. And I'm just glad unions are here and having the moment. And I do think, you know, we're not going to do it by ourselves. I guess if I would say, and just, you know, for folks listening, it's like, you know, because the rules are so rigged and things aren't what they were, it really does take everybody coming together to do it and to unionize. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about in our movement David and Goliath and all these fights, but it shouldn't be a David and Goliath fight for everybody. Not everybody should have to be heroic to assert and like access their basic rights. That is, I think, a fundamental problem. And so you know, and so we need to work to fix those things together. But I think, you know, in this moment, you know, it's not possible to do alone, and partnerships and relationships with UU and other organizations, community organizations aren't so important. And I guess I would just wanted to reiterate our appreciation for constantly on the right to organize, on organizing campaigns, on state and local policy issues. You all always show up. And I think just want to, you know, extend appreciation from all of us really and everywhere, and also extend, you know, we're here and want to continue figuring out how to go deeper. So just thank you, Terry. Thank you, Denise, for the opportunity.
I'd like to just throw out one thing as we close. I think unions and UUs have had a history where they've not always been progressive. There was a time that people of color, LGBTQ plus people, women were oftentimes told to be a little more quiet and ladylike and whatever. But I think both entities now have really have shifted gears in a very major and important way, and are so much more progressive, offering opportunities for folks who wouldn't have opportunities otherwise. And I think that's a place where, you know, we have that kind of history, but together now we are so, you know, as Carlos was saying, so much more progressive, and together can be even more progressive and can move more people in that direction. So I'm really appreciative of the kind of change that both organizations, and I think organizations, there are many union organizations, but you know what I'm talking about, how they've changed directions and offer opportunities for people who might not have opportunities elsewhere, opportunities for leadership, opportunities for thought leadership, and are reaching people. And again, when we talk about class, giving people class privilege, and class advantage in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that's really important to note, and to see the kind of shift and realize that we can all undergo that shift. And most important, we can push folks who are much less progressive. We can see the kind of arc we've made. So we know that that's possible. And there are a lot of folks out there who aren't where we are. And we know that we can move them in that direction because we can look at what we've done with both of these entities.
I'm thinking about action, and I think it was like last year sometime that I got an email asking if we couldn't get some UUs to support some union members, and it was within a day or something like that. And it turned out we couldn't, although I got some people right in the neighborhood. They couldn't think of anybody to go. One thing you learn in community organizing is that a body count really matters. These union members were going in and it was 2 or 3 people. And if they could have had 10 UUs join them and hold their hand while they were telling the management that things aren't right, it would have made more difference. I don't know how that situation turned out, but I do know that there are things you can do to help the unions. And if you're retired and have the time to go stand with unions, do it, because it'll help people. Well, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so
Thank you. It
much.
was a pleasure. You're welcome.
Take care.
Thank you to all 3 presenters today, Cleola Brown, Carlos Jimenez, and Denise Moorhead.